Imagine being betrayed by your own family, accused of a crime, humiliated in public, and thrown out on the streets with nothing. That's exactly what the billionaire Caldwell family did to their daughter, Sarah. But what they didn't see coming was that 20 years later, she'd be back. And she didn't come back to forgive. She came back to destroy their empire brick by brick with a weapon they never expected: the truth. Stay till the end to find out how the coldest, most calculated revenge in history brought down a dynasty. The return of Sarah Caldwell. Imagine a gala at the Caldwell estate, a bastion of old money and new power looming over New York's elite like a monument to prosperity. The champagne flowed, laughter echoed through the marble halls, and the Caldwell family, led by their ruthless patriarch Robert Caldwell, paraded their carefully constructed perfection. But like any luxurious tapestry, there were loose threads, tangled knots of secrets, and a dark stain they fought to conceal. And that stain had a name: Sarah. Sarah Caldwell. A name that, to most of the guests, meant nothing. To the family, it was a forbidden whisper, a ghost from a past they had buried under layers of opulence and lies. 20 years had passed since Sarah, then a young woman of 18, was brutally disinherited and cast out from that very mansion, accused of a crime she swore she didn't commit. Her name was erased from family records, her existence denied, her memory cursed. She was the prodigal daughter who would never be welcomed home. But fate, or perhaps justice, has a peculiar sense of humor. That night, at the height of the Caldwell's celebration, the mansion's grand doors swung slowly open. The music softened, and conversations died. And there, standing on the threshold, was not the fragile, broken girl they had banished. This was a woman with eyes that held the depth of 2 decades of pain and resilience, and a smile that was both enigmatic and dangerous. She hadn't come for forgiveness. She'd come to collect. And what she brought with her wasn't a suitcase, but a truth. A truth so devastating it threatened to dismantle the Caldwell empire, brick by brick. Get ready, because this is the story of how the disinherited daughter returned, and how what she brought with her destroyed a millionaire family. The Gilded Cage. To understand the magnitude of Sarah's return, we have to go back in time, to the golden age of the Caldwells. Robert Caldwell, the patriarch, was a titan of the real estate industry. A man of relentless vision, he built his fortune on the rubble of other people's dreams, always with a charming smile and an impeccable reputation. His wife, Victoria, was the personification of aristocratic elegance and coldness, more concerned with social standing than the well-being of her own children. They had 2 heirs: Thomas, the eldest son, a clone of his father in both ambition and cruelty, and Emily, the middle child, a spoiled and envious socialite who saw Sarah as a threat to her own position. Sarah was different. The youngest, born from one of Robert's earlier affairs, she was raised in the Caldwell mansion from a young age. Though legally a Caldwell, she always felt the shadow of her birthright hanging over her. While Thomas and Emily were groomed to take over the empire, Sarah found solace in books, art, and the gardens, seeking beauty in a world that often felt ugly. She was the only one in the family who questioned her father's business practices, the only one who saw the humanity behind the numbers and profits. This sensitivity, which should have been a virtue, was seen as a weakness by the Caldwells. The turning point came on Sarah's 18th birthday. A priceless piece of jewelry, a diamond necklace that had belonged to Victoria's great-grandmother, vanished from the family safe. Panic swept through the mansion. The police were called, and the investigation, subtly orchestrated by Thomas and Emily, pointed directly at Sarah. Forged evidence, twisted testimonies, and the lack of a solid alibi, Sarah had been in her room, reading as usual, sealed her fate. Robert, without hesitation, publicly disinherited her, accusing her of theft and dishonor. Victoria, with a look of pure contempt, disowned her. Thomas and Emily, with triumphant smirks, watched as she was dragged from the mansion by security into the pouring rain, with only a small backpack and a shattered heart. The scene was brutal, humiliating, and seared into Sarah's memory like an indelible scar. She swore that one day the truth would come out. She swore they would pay. The exile and the mentor. Cast out from a paradise of luxury and privilege, Sarah found herself alone in the world at just 18, her reputation in tatters. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The first few years were about pure survival. She worked menial jobs, washing dishes, cleaning houses, sleeping in shelters. Hunger and cold were her constant companions. But with each passing day, the pain of betrayal and the injustice of the accusation forged itself into a cold flame of determination. She didn't just want to survive, she wanted to prove her innocence and, more importantly, expose the rot behind the Caldwells' perfect facade. During this exile, Sarah met people the Caldwells would never have given a second glance. She found kindness in strangers, solidarity in marginalized communities. She learned about real life, about the daily struggles of ordinary people, something the Caldwell family, in their gilded bubble, could never comprehend. The experience transformed her. The naive, dreamy girl gave way to a pragmatic, intelligent woman with an iron will. She continued her studies at night in public libraries, devouring books on law, finance, and investigation. She had no money for expensive lawyers, so she would become her own. She had no detectives, so she would become her own investigator. The turning point in her exile came when she stumbled upon a retired private investigator, Arthur Finch. Finch was a grizzled, jaded man, but with an unshakable sense of justice. He had worked a few high-profile cases involving New York's elite and had a healthy distrust of the rich and powerful. Sarah, with her tear-filled story and fierce determination, convinced him to help her. Finch, initially skeptical, was quickly impressed by Sarah's intelligence and persistence. He taught her the ropes of investigation, how to follow leads, how to dig up hidden information, how to unravel lies. He became her mentor, her confidant, and the only father figure she had ever truly known. Together, they began to unearth the Caldwells' past. Not just the theft of the necklace, but a much larger web of corruption, fraud, and manipulation. They discovered that the necklace's disappearance was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, orchestrated by Thomas to disinherit Sarah and consolidate his own power within the company. They also discovered that Robert Caldwell, the patriarch, wasn't as untouchable as he seemed. There were irregularities in his dealings, shady backroom agreements, and a fortune built on a shaky foundation. Sarah and Finch worked tirelessly day and night, gathering evidence, building a dossier that, if revealed, could bring the entire Caldwell empire crashing down. The seed of revenge had been planted, and now, 20 years later, it was ready to bloom. The master plan, with the complete and irrefutable dossier in hand, Sarah and Finch spent the last few years refining their plan. This wouldn't be impulsive revenge, but a meticulously calculated operation designed to dismantle the Caldwells from the inside out, using their own weapons against them: the law, the media, and above all, the truth. The goal wasn't just to reclaim what was hers, but to expose the hypocrisy and corruption that propped up the Caldwell family. The plan had several phases. The first was infiltration. Sarah, with a new identity and a modest fortune she had built through shrewd investments and anonymous help from Finch, bought a minority stake in one of the Caldwell's subsidiary companies. She used a fake name, a fabricated background, and a look that, while familiar, was different enough not to raise immediate suspicion. She became Mrs. Smith, an astute and discreet investor who slowly began to move into the Caldwells' inner circle. The second phase was real-time intelligence gathering. Through her position in the subsidiary, Sarah gained access to internal documents, emails, and conversations that confirmed the irregularities she and Finch had discovered. She planted hidden cameras and microphones in strategic locations, recording incriminating conversations between Robert, Thomas, and Emily. She discovered they were involved in a massive money laundering and tax evasion scheme using a network of offshore shell companies. Thomas's ambition and Emily's greed had blinded them to the approaching threat. The third phase was setting the trap. Sarah, with Finch's help, secretly contacted a renowned investigative journalist, Michael Thorne, known for his relentless exposés on corporate corruption. She gave Thorne a small sample of the evidence, just enough to pique his interest but not enough to compromise the operation. Thorne, smelling the story of a lifetime, agreed to work with her on the condition that his source remained anonymous until the right moment. Sarah also contacted lawyers specializing in white-collar crime, preparing the ground for the legal storm to come. Sarah's return to the Caldwell mansion on the night of the gala was no accident. It was the climax of her plan. She knew the family would be gathered, vulnerable, and that the news of her return alone would send a shockwave through the room. But the real blow would come later. She had timed everything perfectly, waiting for the moment the Caldwells were at the peak of their arrogance to deliver the final strike. The web of destruction was woven, and the Caldwells unknowingly were about to walk right into it. The reckoning. The silence in the Caldwell mansion was shattered by Sarah's calm, cool voice. "Good evening, Caldwell family," she said, her voice laced with an irony only she could appreciate. "It seems my presence isn't so unwelcome after all. Or maybe you just don't recognize me without the tears and humiliation I wore the last time." Robert Caldwell was the first to recover from the shock. "Sarah, what are you doing here? How dare you set foot in my house?" His voice was a low growl, but there was a subtle tremor in it. Thomas and Emily were pale, their eyes fixed on her as if they were seeing a ghost. Victoria, the matriarch, simply watched, her expression unreadable. "I've come for a reckoning, Father," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "I've come to bring the truth you tried to bury for 20 years to light." She then pulled an envelope from her purse. Not just any envelope, but one sealed with the insignia of Arthur Finch's office. "Do you remember that name? Arthur Finch? The private investigator you bribed to forge the evidence against me?" Panic began to ripple through the Caldwells. Thomas tried to interject, but Sarah cut him off. "Don't worry, Thomas. Your turn is coming. But first, let's talk about great-grandmother's diamond necklace, the one I supposedly stole." She then projected an image onto a large screen that had been discreetly set up in the living room. A photo of a younger Thomas, selling the necklace to a black market fence. The proof was irrefutable. Thomas's face went white as a sheet. "And it doesn't stop there," Sarah continued, her voice rising with authority. "While I was in exile, you were building an empire on a house of cards, money laundering, tax evasion, illegal deals. I have all the proof, every transaction, every email, every recorded conversation." She then displayed complex charts of money flows, bank statements from offshore accounts, and transcripts of conversations that implicated Robert, Thomas, and Emily in a web of financial crimes. The room was silent, save for the shocked whispers of the guests. Robert Caldwell, the man who had never shown weakness, collapsed into his armchair. Victoria, for the first time, looked genuinely shaken. Emily tried to flee but was blocked by the security guards Sarah had discreetly hired and positioned throughout the mansion. The truth, raw and unfiltered, was laid bare for all to see. The Caldwell empire, built on lies and corruption, was crumbling before their very eyes. But Sarah still had one final blow to deliver. "You thought you could destroy me, didn't you?" Sarah said, her voice now filled with a cold satisfaction. "You thought I was just some naive kid you could throw away. But I learned. I learned from the best. And now it's my turn to play your game." She then revealed the final document she had brought. Not a will, but a legally binding agreement, signed by Robert Caldwell years ago under duress. The document stipulated that if any financial irregularity or crime was ever proven against Caldwell Enterprises, the family's entire fortune would be reverted to a global charity fund, and the family members would be disinherited and banned from any position of power in their own companies. It was a fail-safe clause Robert had been forced to sign by a former business partner he had double-crossed, a clause that Finch had unearthed. This document, Sarah explained Shichun, ensures that the Caldwell fortune, built on the misery of so many, will now be used for good. And you, Robert, Thomas, and Emily, will have nothing left. Not the name, not the money, not the power. You will be disinherited, just as I was, but this time, for your own crimes. The shock was indescribable. The Caldwells were trapped in their own web of lies. The condition was irrefutable, the evidence overwhelming. The news spread like wildfire. The next day, newspapers and TV stations across the country ran the headlines. Caldwell Empire collapses. Disinherited daughter reveals decades of corruption. Caldwell Enterprises stock plummeted, business partners fled, and federal investigations were launched. Robert, Thomas, and Emily were arrested, facing charges of fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Victoria was left alone in the now empty, tarnished mansion, the family's reputation in ruins. Sarah felt no joy in their downfall, only a profound sense of justice. She had fulfilled her promise. She had exposed the truth, and what she had brought back was not just proof of her innocence, but the destruction of an empire built on falsehoods. She had proven that true wealth lies not in money, but in integrity and the pursuit of truth. A new legacy, with the Caldwells unmasked and their empire in ruins, Sarah didn't seek the fortune for herself. She oversaw the transition of the assets to the charity fund, ensuring the money was used for noble causes, like education for underprivileged children and support for victims of injustice. She used her experience and knowledge to help others who had been wronged, becoming an advocate for social justice and corporate transparency. She became a respected figure, a voice for the voiceless, building a new fortune, not of money, but of impact and legacy. And so, the story of the disinherited daughter became a legend about resilience, about the relentless pursuit of truth, and about how justice, no matter how long it takes, always finds a way. The Caldwell family was destroyed, not by an act of revenge, but by the revelation of their own lies. And Sarah, the girl who was cast out with nothing, returned with the most powerful weapon of all, the truth. A truth that not only set her free, but also changed the world around her. If you know a story of injustice that needs to be told, or if you've been a victim of betrayal yourself, share your experience in the comments. We believe every story has the power to inspire and transform. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will surprise you and make you think about the true meaning of family, wealth, and justice.